All right. So what I want to talk about today is home inspections. And I've got this is a follow-up we did not too long ago. We did a live home inspection training at a real life property in the city of Rochester with a real life home inspector. And that inspector did a as usual thorough inspection and put it into his typical report that he would give to any client. So I want to spend some of the time today anyway, going over that report so that each of you know what it looks like, just what to expect from it, how it is, etc. So that can be effective for you to know what you're getting into when you do have an offer accepted with an inspection. Before we dive into the report, I think conceptually, I'll just introduce the idea that um, don't get me wrong, like inspections really are designed to where if there is something that we didn't know about, that the buyer is informed and able to make a decision to continue on with the purchase after that information. But the point I really want to drive home is that if you have a deal die after a home inspection and there wasn't anything that wasn't visibly available to you as their agent to know about and to present to the buyer as something to consider. And then a home inspection happens, and the home inspector is pointing out what is visibly known and obvious to the buyer, and that changes things for the buyer. I don't mean to be blunt, but that's on you as the agent. That's your fault, arguably. Okay. And the implications, uh, I think it's tough to get an inspection done these days for around $300, but that I guess at the baseline, like low end to $300 to $500, for just like a base level home inspection, that's what these buyers are paying for that service. In the concept of like, why pay for something if the results are going to be, hey, I don't want to buy that home as a result of what I found out, when it's a scenario of like you could have informed that buyer of the same potential issue. Because what I'm not saying is like go out and act like a home inspector or pretend to be a home inspector. But it's important to understand how these home inspections work and ultimately how to craft the approach for your business on how buyers need to be, thinking of what a home inspection is and what they're going to find in that and what they can, accomplish as the next step as a result of a home inspection. All this rambling to say, like, if there's something obvious that needs to be pointed out about a house, you need to point it out in the showing and while they're making an offer and to make sure that they're comfortable with it and not just rely on a home inspector to point out the obvious and then get into whether or not the decision should be made to move forward or not from the buyer. The decision should be made to move forward or not from the buyer at the onset of uh, considering the property after the showing. And if you're approaching the process to where you have, again, like, be careful with this because I want you to have like the mindset of a home inspector when you're touring properties with buyers, but not act directly on their behalf as their home inspector unless you happen to be licensed and certified and all that to be one. Um, to cut through this, like if you're able to look at a roof outside of the house in broad daylight and see that the shingles look older and they're curling and some are missing and it looks damaged, like that should trigger you to have a conversation with the buyer to where, hey, you understand, like this, I could just tell this roof is old. I don't even need to look at the disclosure, whatever it says. Like it looks old. You need to budget to replace it. If it were me, I would budget right away to replace it because it's old enough to where, it's going to likely cause or potentially cause more problems the longer you wait, and it gets more expensive the longer you wait, and it's going to cost $15,000. And this is where you got to be careful with the ballparks that you throw around, but to have an educated guess, they need to know about that before they write the offer. If a furnace is just looks old, you need to point that out. And, hey, this is for a good furnace these days, you're $4,000 on average. And this thing, I mean, it could last you another 5, 10 years. Who knows? A lot of these old furnaces, they're built to last and they're built like tanks. And nothing surprises me with that said, but you also need to plan on, this thing working overtime in a cold winter like we're having so far, and 0 degrees out, and it fails, and you need to come out of pocket 4 grand to get a new one in order to have heat in your house. That's a reality, a potential reality. And to not leave that discussion and therefore the decision that the buyer is going to make up to the home inspector to provide that information, that's ultimately, where I want you to be focused on in terms of what you need to develop around in order to get to the point where you can confidently and comfortably know the condition elements and aspects involved with any house, and know what to look for, and know how to handle a conversation with a potential buyer that's interested as to whether or not it makes sense for them to pursue the purchase of that home with those issues, at hand. Because keep in mind, a home inspection is a visual inspection, even from a home inspector. They're not getting behind the walls. Don't get me wrong; they may have, some infrared moisture detecting tools and things like that that you don't have, that they could use. But for the most part, professional home inspections and inspectors are operating on a visual only inspection at the time and date of when that inspection occurs. They don't know what's behind the walls. They don't know how the furnace is running, after the inspection and until closing. They're only going to see what they can see. So, in theory, with that said, and again, I'm not telling you to be out there advising as a licensed home inspector, because you're not, but you're looking at the same things that they are. Outside of removing covers on furnaces and electric panels, you're looking at the same things they are. A furnace and electric panel there, example, like that nuance, like you could get a lot established just by the looks of the the system itself to know whether it's newer or older. An older electric, you know, the conversation of like, hey, this looks pretty old. Chances are there's some misappropriated wiring and faulty circuits and things like that. You may want to budget a couple $1,000s for an upgrade to the panel and service itself. But the whole point here is you don't want to run this business with your people that are looking to purchase homes with the notion that, okay, I just got to decide, or I'm just there for you to decide whether you like this house or not. And if you do, I'll write the offer and negotiate to an acceptance with a contingency on a home inspection, and then we'll find out what this house really is and decide if we're buying it or not. It's a disservice to your clients because you're having them spend money that ultimately could be saved if you were just there to be their advisor as well, to visually point out what you feel is good and bad about the property. I mean, think of it this way, like every property that you write an offer on should be accompanied by a thorough opinion of yours on what the house is and its, the condition elements and aspects, from your unlicensed, home inspector perspective. Anybody have any questions about this conceptually before I dive into an actual inspection report to get into the nitty gritty of like what you need to learn in order and what you need to gain experience on in order to, represent clients properly in this fashion? Because
Can
it's
I
not
ask a
only a
question?
poor represent. Sorry, Shannon, just 1 second. I was gonna say it's not only a poor like fiduciary to your buyers when you're having them spend money if there was a way to avoid that on a home inspection. Meaning, like if the home inspector is just going to tell them, "Hey, this roof is pretty old. I would budget for a replacement." Like that, you didn't need a license to tell a buyer that. But it's also a disservice to you as a business owner to essentially run the business to where, um, there's just the analogy of throwing stuff at a wall and hoping that it sticks. Shannon, go ahead. Sorry.
So before I go in and I take a buyer into a house to look, I will research the listing, pull apart the PCD and the ERTS attachment if it's available, and look for ages of mechanics. And I print a listing for me with the private remarks and then the client listing. And I'll manually write on there the dates. If dates are provided, I'll manually write on the date or manually write the dates on the sheet and give it to them at the showing. So if I don't have a date on any mechanic at all, I will let them know that as we're walking in the door so that they're already aware of possible ages might be older than what they were hoping for. Um, and then look at previous listings just to see if there were any ages listed on a previous listing. Not that I will take them at their gospel because I know that that's not what it is, but some kind of guideline. That way I'm already setting them up for what's to come when they walk in the door. They know that the ages might be older than what they're expecting. Is that wrong to do that? I just feel like it's setting them up for more success. They're coming in with, okay, I know I'm going to come in here and the roof is probably at least 25 years old. So I know
Yeah.
I have to budget for that or
No,
just
I think
to,
it's great. I think it's great practice to do that. And that's like the precursor, preliminary work that each of you should be doing prior to a showing to, have you're prepared to speak to the property that they're interested in, right? Because I guess the whole notion, or part of the notion anyway, becomes like, are we running this business to where it's just like, hey, I want to see this house, and it's like, okay, let's go see it, and no prep work going into it besides making sure you're able to open the door and have permission to see the listing itself, right? Versus the prep work to go into something to have like your material ready to present or the information ready to present to your clients while there. But also, where that really gets effective and good to what you spoke to, that process is if you know that a buyer has, pushed back or has stated that they don't want to worry about replacing a roof, they want something that has a roof that's 5 years or newer, for example, and they're telling you about a property they're interested in that has a 25-year-old roof. If it were me, I'd be talking to them about that before you go see it, just to say, like, hey, happy to show you this house, but what's changed? Or in this context, informing them first, right? Of like, hey, I just want you to know that the roof is stated to be 25 years old. I can tell from the pictures in the listing that it definitely shows that way. This is something that you're probably going to have to budget for replacement right away or sooner than later. And I ballpark it. It's a big house. I think it's going to be around a 20 grand out of pocket expense. Are you okay with that? And if they say yes, which contradicts to what they've told you previously about their criteria, well, now you need to dive in further with them, right? And really not question it in a negative sense or challenge it, but just like, hey, I want to understand everything that you're looking for at a higher level. Like, what's changed from the original conversation we had about not wanting a property with an old roof? Always come from curiosity because they may respond with like, well, yeah, appreciate you asking, and we've realized like with our budget and with how this search is going so far that we're going to be a little more flexible, and Turns out talked with, Uncle Bill, and he's a roofer, and he said he'd help us out, and we shouldn't be afraid of it, and we've got a plan in place. It's like, okay, game on, no problem. Thank you for that. Versus if they're like, well, nothing's changed. I don't want a house with an old roof, but I still want to see this tomorrow at 1. I got a choice to make. So I got a choice of like, all right, is this just hope and a prayer? Or is there an opportunity to be more effective with your, reconsulting at this point to, just set the proper expectations and or, have a clear understanding of what their criteria is. But no, I think, to Shannon's point, like there has to be a level of preparation going into I mean, really everything you do in this business, right? But showings specifically, like you could just, show up and unlock the door, having permission to do so and let them in and not have anything to tell them. And then not tell them anything about the house while they're there and just wait to see if it's something that they're interested or not. And if they are, great. Let's go. What do you want to offer? Let's go write an offer and see if we can get it to stick. And I mean, I guess in that context, God forbid if they do waive an inspection without the proper advisement on your end. We get paid a lot of money, keep in mind, for a transaction, to represent people's best interests, right? And what I'm, this topic today of inspections and how to approach them or how to understand, what to look for, it covers a couple things in our industry currently of one, like, well, like I spoke to already, save the buyers some time and money if you're able to just point out what's clear and obvious that a home inspector would be as well, that uh, changes the decision they're making on that property. But two, in a market where, you have to continually navigate how to go about representing buyers where majority of transactions aren't going to have a home inspection. Well, this, just because of our market conditions today, January 2026, like happy to put my foot in my mouth if this changes, but I would expect the trend to continue throughout the year here that you're not going to have a lot of transactions play out where it gets accepted with a home inspection contingency on a competitive listing anyway. So if you're, you know, setting the expectation of what the market conditions are around that, and then you have buyers that are waiving inspections as a result of that to be competitive, but you're not in a position to advise them on um, what they're buying condition wise, it's bad news. So this becomes really important. Now, a lot of you may be hearing this and like, I'm not a contractor. I don't know things about homes. Like, I'll give you perspective. My line is that literally I can't hang a picture on a wall without screwing it up, me myself personally. Cannot swing a hammer. I cannot use a drill. I am not a manly man. But developed a skill set, through experience, but with purpose to where, I'm telling you, you could, sell 0 homes and have an equivalent skill set that I have in terms of what to look for in a property in order to advise a client. And it becomes really important. Make sense? All right. So let's dive into this inspection report itself. Sharing my screen here. I'm just going to kind of go through this page by page and let this guide the discussion. But again, this is, Central Real Estate Inspections, Jim Wertenberg. Highly recommended personally and throughout the industry, but this is his report format. Start with table of contents, which really, I mean, let's just have this serve as the guide, right, of what is being inspected and what are the components of the home itself, right? You have exterior, You have, the roof, the structure of it, the foundation of it, the basement, heating system, plumbing, electrical, all the rooms, right? Attic. I mean, top to bottom, inside and out, fairly obvious. You want to inspect whatever you can inspect. And again, like home inspectors aren't allowed to tear down a wall to see what's behind it. This page is, I guess, one that, is important, but often gets overlooked in the sense of like, here's all the definitions of how they're, um, you know, um, labeling what they're inspecting, right? And you just get various elements as to how to consider what the condition of the property is in, right? And inspected just signs that it was inspected, looks good. Maintenance, in the opinion of the inspector, it's worth noting that this item, component, or unit should be considered uh, to install, replace, or may require minor servicing. Deferred maintenance items, whereas routine maintenance, according to manufacturers, recommended has not been completed or suggested to bring up to today's standards. So that's where, some of this gets gray, right? To where it's like everything could be perfectly fine with that furnace. However, if a home inspector sees that it hasn't been serviced in 3 years, they're going to point that out. Now, the notion that everything is running fine currently in this example of the furnace, but it hasn't been serviced, like that's, yeah, I mean, that's valid cause for concern from a buyer perspective. It's important for them to know that going into this. And that's also something that you can find just by looking at the service tag on the furnace itself. Because if it is being serviced, then the company will, you know, create their log or put their tag on it, right? So if you don't see any of that, then that's a good sign that like this thing may have just been running and not maintained. And if it's designed to last for 20 years and it's 10 years old, maybe it fails a lot sooner if it hasn't been properly maintained. Safety, just I guess fairly obvious, right? If there's a safety issue, be pointed out. And then it gets into, recommended repairs from the inspector's opinion, um, required maintenance in their opinion, right? As it's not functioning as intended, expected to fail or missing. And then also kind of, they start establishing budget type categories in his way of categorizing the labeling from the inspection report, right? Like this recommendation, something minor, low expense, usually less than $1,000. Keep in mind that's one opinion, right? You need to understand your buyer's perspective of budgets beyond the purchase of the home, right? Because a buyer may be hearing like, well, yeah, okay, it's great that it's only $1,000, but like I'm gonna buy this home and I'm strapped for cash afterwards for the next 2 years. I'm not going to have an extra $1,000 to invest. You hear that, and it's like, all right, thank you for telling me that. Let's really regroup. And I got some questions as to making sure that this makes sense from an overall standpoint, much less this house. But if you got a buyer who you've teed up, homeowner expectations with, and their understanding of okay, yep, I get it. I'm going to have things I need to budget for. And I'm here to make decisions based on is there anything unexpected that I need to budget for? Or is there anything major that is also unexpected that I need to budget for? And that's going to properly influence my decision to buy this house or not. What requires maintenance is now getting into the okay, probably exceeds $2,000 and can affect the value of the property. Then you get into present, not tested. So it's, just visually observed and nothing that they could really um, test. So, for example, it's very important to have utilities on for an inspection to be performed. So otherwise, you're just going to get a lot of that notated throughout a report. Like, yeah, the furnace is there, but I couldn't turn it on. Yeah, the electric is the panel's there, but I don't know if it's working because the power's not on. Yeah, there's a sink, but the water's not on. I have no idea if it's working or leaking or what. And then not inspected issues, and get lack of power falls into that as well. But pointing out things that just safety reason, like exterior inspections become more less thorough, I guess, this time of year, right? Inspectors aren't going to get in on top of a roof in the wintertime and in proper conditions, and spring, summer, fall potentially. Depending on the inspector, they and the roof itself, they may be up there kind of making sure it's stable. I got just general information here. It's always nice to have kind of the overall just like state of the union with the property, right? When the inspection was done. Um, weather, right? Like, was this done when it's pouring rain? And, then you can, reference back with a buyer of like, hey, like this basement was bone dry, and the inspector notated, and I remember it pouring rain then. Like, that's helpful information to have. Also just, general uh specs of the house. Then you get into the report itself, again, and we kind of, I'll fly through this just to touch on really the table of contents, right? But getting into the lots and grounds, and just the walkways outside, the steps, the porch, and how's the grading, right? Like, grading becomes an overlooked item of a property, where if you have the grading or the land of the property itself is pitched towards a house, that's a big concern for water issues in the house and among the foundation. That versus if it were, the house sitting up and the grading is pitched down for the water to flow away from. But then also just around the foundation specifically, if you can notice any areas where, sometimes there may be like a little, not necessarily a hole, but like a slope of soil or grading that pitches towards the house, and the rest of it is flat and graded properly. Like, that may trigger you to, or it should trigger you to see what that side of the basement looks like on that side of the house. So if you can also pinpoint potential, issues, or if you can be the source of pinpointing a potential um, cause of an issue for a property, well, you're really showing up as the expert now. So, for example, like similar to a grading conversation, but say you got moisture in a basement, where you're looking at a wall, it's got like looks like mold growth on it, or maybe there's, staining on the basement walls and the foundation, or maybe there's a little bit of, water, on the floor and a specific spot. Like, that should trigger you to go outside the house to that, corner of the house or that side of the house and take a look around and what's going on. And oftentimes there'll be something obvious where it's just like a gutter that's not extended, and the gutter is just dumping water right on that corner. And yeah, of course you're going to have moisture on that side. And if the other three corners have gutter extensions and they're dry, well, you got to be careful with this, because again, you're not a home inspector, you're not a contractor, but you can, provide an opinion that, look at maybe something we want to dig into further, but be willing to, we kind of just found some evidence as to why this is an issue. And that may validly set them at ease. If they're the type where it's like, okay, I appreciate your perspective, but you're not a home inspector, I want to get a professional opinion on this. Respect that from them. Don't expect them necessarily to take your non-expert, construction opinion, unless you have it and you are one, right? As their decision making, how they make decisions. Don't be offended if you tell somebody what your opinion is of why this looks the way it does. Um, if they still want a second opinion, you're not the expert in that field, right? Vegetation, like, here's something. Okay, so like vegetation, like trees hanging over houses, become, a condition risk for properties themselves for a couple reasons. One, the if sunlight's not allowed to like, get on the roof, that can cause or hit the roof properly, that could cause you know, shade can cause more moisture to build up on the roof shingles, and then you have moss that deteriorates the condition and deteriorates the roof faster than what it would otherwise. Of equal importance, if not more importance, I guess. You got to keep in mind that just because the buyer approves of the condition and the bank approves of the condition, if there is one for an appraisal, doesn't mean that the insurance company after closing is going to approve of the condition. So trees hanging over houses becomes a significant insurance risk for obvious reasons in that they don't want to have just a, high risk of an insurance claim happening because there's a tree hanging over a roof 12 feet and first sign of the wind or first strong windstorm this fall or winter, that tree crashes onto the roof and now they're replacing an entire roof. I guess I'm going to kind of take an aside here to help everybody understand how important this topic is overall of understanding condition of homes and advising your clients accordingly. It's more and more common that we're hearing stories because the insurance industry is so fickle at this point that buyers after closing will get notice from their insurance company that, hey, you got to fix this issue in the next 3 months, otherwise we're canceling your policy. There's no contingency to protect that. You become the protection. Because guess what? Every time that happens, that example where it's like, like the insurance company is telling me they're going to cancel my policy if I don't do this, like that's coming back to you, unfortunately. So this is why this is important, not just protecting your time and your, making sure the transaction goes through, but to make sure that they know the decision that they're making based on the condition of their home of the home and how it could potentially affect them after closing from both a budgeting standpoint, comfort standpoint on their end, but also like insurance company may take the option off the table and say, no, you need to do this now. We're not insuring you anymore if you don't. And went on that rant just off of a vegetation aspect, but specifically trees hanging over houses. Questions on that? That was kind of a topic I just threw out there. It should be scary, I guess. All right, moving on. We got fences, we got exterior surface and condition. So here's, where you get a maintenance flag for the aluminum siding, or trim in this case, right? Where corner trim pieces are missing. Normally secure the aluminum siding to the structure. This condition can allow siding to loosen or detach, increase the risk of moisture intrusion and insect infestation, creates a safety hazard due to exposed sharp aluminum. Recommended to repair. What they're saying is like, hey, the house isn't going to fall down as a result of this, but you're going to want to maintain your home, and this is something that you're going to want to take care of. So fascia and soffits, just to explain the items, like fascia, would be this piece here, kind of like a trim piece in between the roof and where the siding starts, if that makes sense. And it was kind of tough to see. And then soffits are kind of the they should be, for the most part, they're either, I guess, just a component like siding to the house, but oftentimes they provide ventilation to the attic. And here you've got, a loose piece that, again, like you're gonna want to fix that because that can cause, water can get in there and freeze in the wintertime and then expand and cause, further damage, or, you could have, a squirrel can jump on the tree and believe it or not, fit through that hole. I got squirrels in your attic. So exterior, so now, doing analyzing the doors, right? And there was a missing pane of glass here. He mentioned not a weather tight seal, stuff like this. Like there hasn't been anything here that you can't see yourself as a buyer's agent. Yeah, right? Or surprised if there is anything in this report. But again, doors, window screeds, exterior lighting, hose bibs, a little note about shutting off the hose bib in the wintertime so it doesn't freeze. Roof. And again, here's kind of some language that really establishes the whole visual inspection, and we're not responsible for anything after the fact of this, and it's just our opinion, and it's not a warranty guaranteeing that there's this much life left on it or this or that, right? Um, so he inspected it ground level and in the attic. Had some snow cover, so he was able to inspect 95% of it. There's nothing here that like determines that the roof is um, in poor condition, so that's good, right? I would still, with something like this, we didn't get into a ton of detail, right? So this, in terms of the major components that are going to cost a buyer the most money, you're looking at roof, siding, windows, probably in that order of expense. Pretty close to it, I guess. At least roof and siding are going to be very significant. Windows, depending on how many there are and how unique they are, how big they are, like can be a pretty costly expense as well. So even if an inspection report like this comes out where the roof doesn't, have any negativity associated with it, I'd be taking a close look with the buyer to make sure like they know what they're getting into. And even to the point where it's like, you know, we're predicting 10 years left of life on this roof. Do they understand that? And do they understand the costs associated with it 10 years from now? You'd be surprised. You'll find a lot of potential homeowners that decide they're not potential homeowners once you go over this stuff with them. Like, as a side topic, I mean, it's okay. Not everybody is designed to own a home, right? Like, there's some people prefer the quote unquote luxury of, okay, if there's an issue that's going to cost me 20 grand to reinvest into my home, that's not how I like to do things, and I'd rather just have that be the landlord's problem. Not necessarily encouraging that, right? But like, that's you got to dive into this stuff with people. We get in flashing, plumbing vents, electrical mast, which is the the riser cable of the where the electric meter is, and then the cable that's going from the meter to the top of the house to the wiring that connects it at the poles in the street to power it. Gutters, downspouts, tensions, etc. Here's again more kind of inspector CYA stuff, right? Like here's we got a downspout extension that is attached directly to a drain. You know, there's nothing bubbling over in terms of overfill from past rain or anything that can be pointed to an issue currently. It's snow on the ground now, so I wouldn't expect there to be, right? So they're going to notate like, hey, we don't know how these drains are functioning without analyzing further. Still on the roof, and you got the chimney and the chimney cap and the flue. Here's a recommendation notice. The chimney flashing has been sealed with tar, which deteriorates over time. Can allow moisture to enter the attic space. Recommended have a qualified roofing contractor evaluate, properly repair, or replace the flashing to ensure a long-term watertight seal. So let's see if we can zoom in here on what he was looking at. You can just kind of tell that, kind of an old, tar job that has deteriorated. You could see it doesn't even go around the other side of the chimney. And, you know, definitely going to want to take care of that, prevent any moisture from getting in the house. Structure, noting that it's wood frame, block foundation, not seeing any differential movement in the foundation, but also the CYA statement where it's like, this is an old house, most houses have cracks. Here's how to think of these cracks. And I'm flying through this because you're gonna all have this to review in depth and certainly can follow up with me directly with any questions. But additional structural issues of the beams in the basement, um, the joists and the trusses, beams, joists, trusses, kind of all that. Like, um, when the basement ceiling is exposed, you see the structure to the first floor, right? And that's a benefit that you have with an unfinished basement versus a finished basement. So kind of keep that in mind, like buying a house with a finished basement, like you really have no idea what's going on with the crucial part of the overall integrity of the house. So it's a risk you're taking no matter what, inspection or not. Points out the type of each material in the structure. We got a safety issue with a hand railing that's not secured properly. So something minor, but issue nonetheless. Get into the basement. Noting ceiling, floor drain. Here it was noted that there wasn't a proper floor drain cover or cap in this floor drain in the basement. And you're going to want to get that because you could have sewer odor, you could have rodents getting in. Um, just definitely something to fix. It's easy fix. Glass block windows in the basement, notes of the electrical service. Is there a smoke detector? Is there ventilation? Uh, and moisture. So you got some moisture that was evident here visually. You got black staining on cement basement walls, typically caused by mold or mildew. Develop in damp, poorly vented areas due to excess moisture. So just kind of pointing this out, but not pointing out like why or where or how, or not where, but why or how yet. Another safety issue with no handrail going down to the basement. All right, getting into more exciting stuff with the heating system. So you noted that it's functional, it's working. Recommending a cleaning and inspection because the last clean and check service was unable to be determined. Um, get that done, he's recommending, unless the seller can produce a satisfactory receipt that such work has been completed within the past 12 months. The inspector saw a list of, an inspection or a service being done every year. They probably wouldn't have noted that. But you get into the manufacturer and the model number and all that, so you have it. He mentioned this live when we were there, but at this point with AI, you could just take a picture of a furnace, and it'll probably tell you about it enough that you need to know. If you get the serial tag on the furnace, then you can really plug that into AI and find out the exact age or just other components or other aspects to it. A heat exchanger is basically like if your heat exchanger is broken in a furnace, you need to get it replaced, period. Because now your potential carbon monoxide issues, and it's just anytime there's a cracked heat exchanger, it's going to need to be replaced. This was not inspected. It wasn't visible to the inspector, so they're always going to cover their butts to say you should really get your furnace checked out if it's of concern to you. Because I couldn't, and I'm not a HVAC tech anyway. So you get that kind of, again, I keep saying CYA aspect with inspectors, like they're not here to be, I guess experts or, the contractor for any one specific trade when it comes to a house, most of them anyway. So they take this approach where it's like, hey, here's what I think. And, if you really want the foolproof answer, you want to get a professional that specializes in this aspect and have them check out. Here's a picture of the heat inspect or the heat, where they would be able to take a look at the heat exchange, and he's unable to inspect 100% of it. What do we got? Dirty furnace filter, reduce the efficiency of the furnace. Doesn't say that it was dirty, so more information about the furnace. All right, here's a big one. Asbestos. Suspected asbestos, I should say, because this hasn't been tested. The inspector's just going off the age of the home and looking for signs of what could be potential asbestos based on the materials that asbestos used to be in. Now, I'm not an expert, but here's my crash course on asbestos. Back in the day, 100 years ago, and I think up till maybe the 50s, asbestos was just a building material. All right. It wasn't until then that it was determined to have significant health risks when there's a high level of exposure to it. So with these 100-year-old homes, like, and let's just walk through the scenario here, right? Like you got a buyer with a budget that, or just, a necessity to, live in the city of Rochester, where most of the homes are going to be 100 years old. Somewhere in your consultation, and I'm not saying like this is something that you bring up on day one, discussion one, and really scare them off, but somewhere along the lines, it should be discussed of like, hey, a lot of these homes have asbestos because it's just a material, building material back in the day. You know, this house right now, like basement tiles, for example, could be a source. Anytime you see, tape around ducts like that could be a source. There's chimney, vents that come into a basement oftentimes that, you can tell the look of it, maybe potential asbestos. You know, how I would approach it is like during a showing, once you're off and running, early on in the process, just to continue to consult and educate and inform around, things that could come up in this inspection and make sure that they're okay with it. Because some people are going to see this and be like, we can't buy this house. We need a total, bring in the guys with the suits, shut it down, mediate this. And it's going to cost a lot of money. That's probably going to be a deal breaker for everybody. But if that's what they need to be protected, that's fine. Others may say, like, well, I'm a homeowner, I can deal with asbestos myself, and I don't really care, and I'll take care of it. That's an aspect too to understand. I guess I'll cover my butt to say, from my understanding, as a homeowner, you can dispose of asbestos in your own home that you're living in without professional remediation. Anytime it's a house you're not owning or living in, or I'm sorry, not owning and living in, and you're dealing with asbestos, now you got to bring in the guys with the spacesuits to remediate. Plumbing, checking out the water main shut off, the service line. Is it copper? Is it PEX? For really education and notation purposes. So far everything here in the plumbing side of it is just being noted, an inspector. What do we got? In the event of emergency, respected gas leak, this is about, so there's a good education piece to it where, hey, if you need to shut off your gas, this is where you do it. If you need to shut off your water, this is where you do it. Gas service line, basement water heater, time of inspection, it's all operational. Also noting that may have to replace pieces in the water heater 5 to 7 years to improve the quality of the hot water. What do we got? This is 6 years old. It's not noted here. I mean, I would tell a client expect to replace a water heater every 10 years. Okay. So like this conversation is, hey, it's 6 years, like water heaters are finicky. It may blow tomorrow. If it's brand new within the last couple of years, it should be fine, right? But when you get to be in this age of like 6 to 10 years, like I would just take a, could be any day approach to be conservative. Electrical panel or electric, noting the amps and the volts into the house, the main service, and type of wiring. Are things grounded? You have smoke detectors. Uh, this is where an inspector does provide, more than we can by removing an electric panel and seeing if everything is wiring properly. I say that because, like, unless you have specific permission from the seller and the seller's agent to take off the panel of a furnace or an electric panel, I would strongly encourage or require that you do not do that without that permission. God forbid you start messing around with something and sparks start flying, right? And you're liable or potentially liable. Um, notes about GFCI outlets. This has got it at the receptacles only, meaning the outlet itself. More modern, have them both in the basements, the GFCI, which is GFCI is anytime a breaker trips, right? There's too much power going into it, or there's detection of water or safety issue, a breaker will trip, shut off that power to that device or outlet, so that it doesn't just continue to overheat or overload, or electric and water aren't a good mixture. That's what GFCIs provide a protection around. Basement laundry area. Um, here we got a recommendation, but nothing that's notated, but it's recommended they use more expensive braided steel water hookup lines, uh, to avoid, any cheap hose bibs, right? That bust and then drain water all over your basement floor. Getting into the bathrooms now. Notated some cracked flooring on a laminate floor. Safety risk due to cuts on the feet, potentially. But everything else, looks good here. Ventilation in a bathroom is important, right? So this one had a fan. If it didn't, it'd be notated. Getting into windows. So, the what's notated here is anytime you see this fogged up element in a window, that means, likely that it's double pane window, meaning two panes of glass, and the seal with that glass, which kind of, I guess the way to describe it is like the glass being sealed keeps the efficiency that a double pane window provides. And when you see this fogging up of the windows, that means that seal is broken, and therefore the energy efficiency that's supposed to be there is likely lost as well. Still a window, still there. You can't really look out of it, I guess, in this case, but you don't have just air blowing in directly, but you're less energy efficient when you see this. These so there's like one guy in town, his name's Lou Waters, and he can take this window frame and replace re-energize, I guess, the seal to these windows without having to replace the entire window. So keep that in mind as an option when you're seeing, old windows that have this fogged up look to them. You may be able to get away with just fixing that one window, for less than what it would be to replace the entire window. Bedrooms, again, he's looking at closets, ceiling, walls, floors, right? Like where are the defects? If I only run it into, doors, like here's a door that's not latching. Thorough inspection, right? Bedroom continuing, same type of stuff, smoke detectors, etc. All right, kitchen. So we got no vent and a gas oven range. Okay. So anytime you have gas appliances, like really should have a vent because, it's not necessarily gas that's just dumping into the house when you turn it on, but there is like, remnants of gas that if you don't have a vent when using gas stoves and ovens, like, could be a health or safety risk. Plumbing fixture. So current drain is an S trap. This allows increased suction when draining. If water is not kept in the bend of the trap, sewer gas will enter the house. The drain also can make a gurgling sound when draining. It's recommended to replace current trap with a P trap configuration to correct these issues. So just kind of modernized plumbing, I guess, right? The S compared to the P trap. Like, things evolve over time. S traps were common at one point. Then the notion of potential sewer gases coming into the house, caused a change to it. Notating countertop standards, etc. Living space. Flying through it just because we're cut on time here. More windows, and these windows couldn't stay open. So, that's an issue, right? Attic. Here's what I want to get to. So, well, first of all, looking at attics is key because you can tell a lot by the roof. And anytime that you can see a roof like this where there's plywood underneath it, that's a good sign because that means that the at some point the roof was torn off and put on new. If you were looking at this and seeing what look like layered shingles, you know, uh, um, above the framing here, then that would tell you like, okay, this has many layers on it, or at least a couple layers on it. It's old. When the roof does need to be done, we're going to need to do a complete tear off based on that method of construction for the time. Another big thing is ventilation. Um, you know, Here they've got uh, roof vents, a window. It's just noting that reduced or inadequate ventilation here. It looks like there was a vent that was sealed off that they're pointing out, but also notating that, between, I'm assuming soffits and the window and the roof, that there is still enough ventilation. Insulation, there is none, it's saying. So, what that's going to be is a energy efficiency concept of like you don't have any insulation protecting the conditioned areas of the home or the livable areas of the home to a non-conditioned area of the home, like this attic where it's not finished, there's no heat going into it, like you're just all the hot air rises, and without this insulation, it's just escaping and causing less energy efficiency throughout the house. And the bathroom fan is vented through the roof, which is good. However, it's detached currently, so obviously defected there. Begin a final general comments, but then it reviews like all the recommended areas. What I like about Jim's report is he breaks it down in multiple ways. You got the kind of the recommended things to think about in this maintenance summary. Then you've got your safety items and what to take care of there. And then you've got kind of recommendation of um, more bigger ticket items that kind of fall on the safety and just overall maintenance of the home category. And then also pointing out that, hey, we weren't able to see what this furnace is really doing. So that's crash course. Sorry to go over time here, but you'll get this sent out this week with the report, with the videos from the inspection itself to review. Again, the messaging here is to really focus on how you're advising your clients on condition of the home and not leaving it up to a home inspector or just to their own device, I guess, right? Like you need to be a partner to your clients to make sure that they're making a decision that is something that makes sense for them based on as much as you know about this home based on the research that you've done and what you can see in person, which is again a similar type dynamic that a home inspector has in the sense of they're just seeing it in person as well. They just have a license and a lot more experience with these um, aspects to professionally comment on. Again, I am not saying go out and tell your clients you're the equivalent of a home inspector and therefore they should waive it, but you can be in a position where you can educate and inform and set the expectations on the condition of the house that you are inspecting if you're able to have an offer accepted with a contingency to make sure that you're not wasting their money just to find out that the inspector told them something that you could have that influences their decision not to buy the house. Hope this was helpful. Happy New Year. Back to the grind. We'll be doing this 2:30 again next Monday, and feel free to reach out anytime in between then. Have a good week all.